I welcome you once again to our Certified Christian Counselor training. This is Module 3 of our training, Understanding Human Development. Understanding Human Development. In this module, we will cover the different aspects of human development: physical, social, cognitive, emotional. I will cover all the different aspects of human development, spiritual development too. We will address factors that affect human development, and we will talk about human behavior, and motivation at the different stages of life. So let's start with definitions. What is human development? Conventionally, they will say that human development is the study of how people change progressively as they mature through life. However, from the Christian point of view, the study of human development is beyond just how people change progressively. It is first and foremost the study of God's wonderful and intricate design of mankind. How God so made man, to transform progressively through different stages of life. You talk about childhood, you talk about teenage years, adolescence, adulthood, and old age, and all of that. It's actually the study of God's intricate and wonderful design of mankind. And mainstream developmental psychology explains how people grow from conception through old age, but human development will cover this growth from the viewpoint of the cognitive growth, social growth, physical growth, emotional growth, and all of that. All the different changes that happen as we grow from conception through old age. In the course of this lecture, we are going to see the limitations of this view and how we approach it from the Christian worldview. But let's go to scriptures and see Bible examples. Luke chapter 2, verse 52. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So even our Lord Jesus Christ, while he walked on this earth as human, he grew in stature, physical growth. He grew in wisdom, cognitive growth. First Samuel chapter 2, verse 26, we see the story of Samuel, the example of Samuel. Bible says, and the child Samuel grew in stature and in favor both with the Lord and men. So we see that the reality of human development is not strange to scriptures. The scripture affirms that human beings grow through the different phases of life. Now, each season in people's lives is very unique. Everybody has their own uniqueness in the different seasons of life that they are in. However, we can see some traits and patterns that are common to people who are in the same stage of life. And we know that these traits and patterns are common to that specific stage of life. Now, why is it important to know this or to study this? It helps us to tell what is normal at each stage of life versus what is abnormal, such that when people come to you for counseling and they are having a particular challenge, a particular problem, you can tell that, okay, this is normal based on the stage of life where they are in. Whereas in some cases, you can tell this is not normal for this stage of life. So, for example, you go to the doctors and they say this person has this condition. They say, no, this is abnormal. At this age, you should not have this condition because you know what is normal for that age, the normal traits, the normal patterns that you should see. Moreover, when you also understand what happens at a different stage of life, you can easily trace where things went wrong if you notice a dysfunction in people's lives. We read what Paul said in First Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. He said, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. So there are things that are normal for a child. They are not normal for an adult. So all through scripture, we see the veracity of the different stages of human development. The apostles affirmed it, Jesus Christ affirmed it. We see it scattered all through scriptures, both in the Old and the New Testament. So, as we begin to study human development, I want you to understand that we do this because it is necessary for proper diagnosis. When you sit with people in the place of counseling, especially when people are troubled, when people have challenges and all of that, you can tell what if their challenge is normal based on their stage of life, if the concerns they have is normal based on their stage of life, and when or if there is a dysfunction, you can tell where things probably went wrong, and then you can ask questions and focus on that stage of their lives. Now, let's talk about the approaches to human development. Human development, there are seven things or seven approaches to human development. We say that human development is continuous. In other words, you can visualize human development as a smooth slope of progression, meaning to say one thing leads to another and leads to another, and then that is how we grow. So take for example, when we talk about cognition. Cognition is progressive. You build on what you knew yesterday, you know, to process what you are knowing today. So cognition is progressive, it is continuous. The memories of yesterday, the knowledge you acquired and all of that, they are the things you build upon today, and then you build upon it again tomorrow, on and on like that. So human development is continuous. In the second instance, human development is discontinuous, meaning to say that some parts of human development happen in discrete stages, where one stage does not necessarily flow into another. So, take for example the stages the changes rather that happen during puberty. It is not as if these changes have started from childhood. It looks like they just come suddenly, boom, and then you begin to see different things happen all at the same time. So human development in some cases, is discontinuous. Paul Baltis, a German psychologist, uh, talked about the lifespan development and aging. That's one of the approaches or perspectives to human development. And part of what he said was that human development is multidimensional, meaning to say that human development involves a dynamic interaction of different factors, which will include psychosocial development, cognitive development, emotional development. That human development is not just about, for example, your emotions or your intelligence. He says that it is multidimensional. He also said that human development is multi-directional, meaning to say that your development can lead you either in the positive or negative direction. That is, human development is not necessarily a good thing sometimes. Sometimes it results in gains, and sometimes it results in losses throughout your life. A good way to explain this is a student who goes to one uncle to collect money, one auntie to collect money, and all of that. Once he graduates from school, he cannot begin to go around like that to collect money again. People now expect him to become responsible. So, in that instance, his development has led to, so to speak, some losses in his life. Some adults will say, it's good to be a child. Children don't worry about anything and all of that. That is part of the price to pay for development. So, human development is multi-directional. There will be some gains, and then, there will be some losses. He also said that human development is multidisciplinary, in the sense that uh, professionals in a single field cannot give an account of human development that will suffice. As much as psychologists are the ones that dominate the study of human development, you can also study human development from the position of a sociologist, from the position of a medical practitioner, from the position of an anthropologist, from the position of a neuroscientist, from the position of an educator, from the position even of an historian. You can study human development from different points of view, from different disciplines. So he says that human development is multidisciplinary. Then he also says that human development is plastic. Plastic in the sense that it is changeable, it is malleable, it can be adjusted. The fact that you have passed a stage of development doesn't mean your fate is sealed. Things can be revisited and changed and adjusted at any stage of life, regardless of what happened at the previous stages of your life. And we must understand it when we counsel people. It tells us that there is no situation that is not redeemable. That you went through trauma at a stage of life doesn't mean that the effect of that trauma should follow you for the rest of your life, because human development is plastic. That you grew up a certain way doesn't mean your life must continue to follow that pattern. Human development is malleable, is changeable, is plastic, can be adjusted. And finally, it says that human development is lifelong. You will continue to develop so long as you are alive. Development does not stop with the death, with age, or maybe, oh, you have grown to a certain stage and then, oh, you have peaked, you stop developing. That is not true. You continue to develop so long as you are alive. Now, from this approach of human development, a lot of people approach to human development, rather, a lot of people have tried to observe the behaviors of men and different reasons why they behave the way they do. People have tried to study how, different stages of life affect our behaviors, affect our outcomes in life, and all of that. One of such people is a man called Eric Erickson. He was the one who proposed the 8 stages of psychosocial development. The 8 stages of psychosocial development. A number of things that we must pay attention to in studying Erickson's 8 developmental stages is: number one, it says that each of these stages have two developmental outcomes, a positive outcome and a negative outcome. Meanwhile, in each of these stages, there will be a crisis, there will be a conflict that must be resolved, a crisis that must be overcome, a conflict that must be resolved. So it says that whether you succeed or fail at overcoming the crisis, at resolving the conflict, will determine the outcome you will get at that stage of life. So we're going to run quickly through the 8 stages that Erickson proposed. His first stage was the stage, or is rather, the stage of infancy, which according to him lasts from birth to 18 months. From birth to 18 months, that is, from the time a child is born to the time that the child is a year and a half. That is the stage of infancy. Please take note of all of these. Stage of infancy from birth to 18 months. Now, what is the conflict at this stage of life? It is the conflict of trust versus mistrust. And the positive outcome at this stage of life would be hope. What it means to say is that at this stage of life, from birth to 18 months, a child depends generally on the adult caregivers, the people, mainly parents and other people who take care of the child, for security, for food, for safety, and all of that. Now, if there is adequate care and love, the child develops trust. If there is no adequate care and love, the child develops mistrust. Now, if the child is able to resolve this conflict of trust versus mistrust and develops a healthy balance, listen, it has to be a healthy balance. There is nothing like 100% trust, 100% mistrust. If a child grows through this state developing 100% trust, it is going to be uh, a life of crisis, because the child must now grow healthily to have a balance of trust versus mistrust, so that they expect positive outcomes in life, but they also understand that the world can be unpredictable and inconsistent, and then they can now cope through those situations, maintaining hope that things will eventually be all right. So that is what happens at the stage of infancy. The second stage is the stage of early childhood. Early childhood. This stage is from the age of 2 to 3 years old. From the age of 2 to 3 years old. At this stage of life, the conflict that must be resolved is the conflict of autonomy versus shame. Autonomy versus shame. This is the time that the child wants to, become independent. They want to manage little independence, do basic actions on themselves, make simple decisions about what they want, about what they prefer, and all of that. If you allow the child to gain control, it develops a will of his own. It becomes, he becomes decisive, so to speak. Otherwise, if you begin to, restrain the child, restrict the child, if you begin to talk down on the child, disallow the child from becoming autonomous, the child becomes, doubtful of himself, may have some sense of shame at the things they don't do right. Because again, at this stage of life, as much as the child wants to be independent, wants to wear his shoe by himself, he wears the right leg on the left leg and the left leg on the right leg. If you are always, booing at the child and making the child feel stupid for doing the things they do, the child can develop a sense of shame, and that is going to affect the child on a long time. It's going to affect the child's psychosocial development, in the future. So at this stage of life, it is normal to fail, and children must be encouraged to try again. So you find a lot of people who have a weak will, who have grown up with a sense of shame, with with a sense of dependence on others, with a sense of self-doubt and all of that. And you don't understand that it came from this early childhood stage. The dysfunctions that they carried from that stage has gone with them through their lives. Then we go to this third stage, that is the preschool stage, from age 3 to age 5. At this stage, the crisis is the crisis of initiative versus guilt. Initiative versus guilt. Now, at this preschool stage, the child begins to take some initiatives, initiates social interactions with others, initiates plays with others, because when a child is young, most times it is the parents that initiate plays, and then the child picks along. But as the child grows to this stage, the child begins to, initiate things, initiate actions, plays, and all of that. If a child succeeds at this stage, he feels like he's able to take the lead, he feels capable, and he begins to develop a sense of purpose. He uh, begins to make, decisions, looking forward at what he wants to achieve through those decisions. But again, if at this stage the child is rejected, turned down, if the social interactions are always turned down and all of that, the child feels a sense of guilt and may withdraw into his shell and carry that uh, 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 thing throughout life, where they are not willing to work with others, where their ego comes down, where there is not so much of self-esteem and all of that. That's what happens at that stage of life. And then the fourth stage is the school stage, between age 6 to 11. At this stage of life, the crisis or the conflict is industry versus inferiority. Industry versus inferiority. Now, through social interactions, the child begins to develop a sense of pride in his or her abilities, in his or her accomplishments, the things that he's able to do successfully, the things that he's able to do excellently. And from there, the child begins to, the outcome is confidence. The child begins to, develop confidence in his own abilities, in his own wisdom, in his own intuition, in his own intelligence, uh to, for instance, succeed at school, for instance, succeed in interacting with others, begins to develop a sense of confidence, feels competent. If there are issues at this stage of life, it can lead to feelings of inferiority, especially when there are no encouragements from parents, from teachers, and from the people around, even from colleagues, peers, and people around the child generally. The child can develop a sense of inferiority. And then the fifth stage, psychosocial development stage of Erickson, is the stage of adolescence. Adolescence. This is where the child begins to face the conflict between identity and confusion. Identity and confusion. This stage usually is between the stage of 12 to 18. So much of the teenage years is spent in this stage. And you should understand that this is usually a delicate stage for young children, a delicate stage for young children. At this stage of life, they are trying to develop a sense of personal identity. They are trying to develop a sense of self. Who am I? What do I aspire to be? What do I like? And all of that. If they succeed at this stage, they develop the ability to stay true to themselves. They know who they are and they stay true to themselves, you know. But if they become confused in this stage of life, if they fail rather at this stage of life, they become confused and they have a very weak sense of self, very weak sense of self. And that can lead to what psychologists call infidelity. Infidelity is simply inability to follow societal norms. And that's why you see deviant behaviors a lot in this stage. Deviant behaviors. So, what is important for adolescents between the ages of 12 and 18 is to find their identity, a sense of self, self discovery, and that now leads to the positive outcome called fidelity, meaning they are not trying to explore vices, they are not trying to experiment with life. They have a stable goal, stable focus, because they know themselves. you know and then the next stage after that is the stage of young adulthood, between 19 to 40. Between 19 to 40. Now, this stage is where there is conflict between intimacy and isolation. This is the stage where people are trying to form very close relationships, make lifelong friends, find a love partner, and all of that. So it's either they form good relationships or, a lot of isolation. And this is where the positive outcome of love is built. Love, love, love. There are people that they truly love. There are people that are dear to their hearts and all of that. If uh there is failure at this stage, that's when you see things like isolation, depression, loneliness, idleness, and all of that. Next stage after that will be the stage of adulthood that lasts between the ages of 40 to 65. The conflict at this stage is the conflict of legacy, or what you call generativity, and stagnation. Now, what is legacy? When you begin to think of the things that will outlast you, it is usually between the ages of 40 to 65 that people focus more on the things that will outlast them, things that they will leave behind when they leave this world. And for some people, it is their children. For most people, in fact, their children are their objects of focus during this stage of life, because those are the ones that will outlast them, that will live beyond them. But then for some people, it is their work. They are trying to build something that will outlast them. They are trying to build a dream, a vision. They are trying to build an NGO. For some people, they are trying to build a ministry and all of that. At this age, between 40 and 65, is where people focus a lot on this. And what that does is, through that stage, they begin to identify the things or the people that they truly care about. They begin to identify the people or the things that they truly care about. If things don't go well in this stage, the person feels stagnated, feels like their life is not moving forward, feels like things are not working for them. And it is usually around that stage that people have what you call midlife crisis. That's when people have midlife crisis. And then finally is the stage of maturity. Maturity. This stage is between from the age of 65 till death. It's at this stage that people begin to, reflect on their lives, the decisions they have made, their triumphs, their woes, and the different, just the different things that have happened in their life. And at this stage, they feel like, oh, they are wise, they have something to bequeath to the next generation. And if reflecting on their lives, they are not happy with the things they see, or they have a sense of failure, regret, bitterness, and all of that. So again, these are the 8 stages of psychosocial development that Eric Erickson proposed. Now, knowing these 8 stages will help you see what is normal for each person at each stage of life. What is the normal, or what are the normal struggles that people have? So, for instance, someone comes to you who is around 45 years old, and the person is thinking of, oh, I don't like how, I don't like my child's score in school and all of that. This is normal. But then you see somebody between age of 40 to 65 who is beginning to talk of how they will find a love life. You understand now, find somebody to marry. You know that no, this is not normal for this stage of life. This is something that should have been dealt with between 19 to 40. So there is a dysfunction. We need to go back to revisit what happened between 19 and 40. Why didn't you find love? Why are you here now? And then when you find an adolescent between 12 and 18 that is talking about love and all of that, no, 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 no. This is not normal for this stage of life. The normal stage of life to begin to think about all of this will be from 19 onwards. So you can tell what is normal at each stage of life, and you can tell what stage of life to revisit when people begin to come up with different things. So somebody comes and is talking about a lot of self-doubt and all of that. You may want to revisit their childhood, what happened between 2 and 3. They may not know, or they may not have full details, but you may be able to trace one or two things from the environment they grew up in, what kinds of parents they have, what was their upbringing like, and all of that. So knowing this is actually very, very important for counseling, and we really, really need to master it. Beyond the work of Eric Erickson, there have been other psychologists who propose different stages of development. One of them is a man called Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget observed human beings and how they develop from the cognitive point of view. So he proposed the theory of cognitive development, where he divided human development into 4 stages: from birth to 2 years old, from 2 years old to 6 years old, from 7 to 11, and then from 13 to adulthood. What he said is that between the from birth to 2 years old, children are in what he called the sensory motor stage. And at this stage, they begin to understand the world through their senses, that's sensory, and then movement, that is motor, through their senses or the sensations they feel, and then through movement. So they begin to learn the world through basic actions that they carry out, things like looking, listening, things like grasping things, and children can grasp, and then sucking and all of that. They begin to interact with the world through their movements and the sensations that they feel. It's in this stage that they begin to understand that even when they cannot see things, those things continue to exist. That phenomenon is called object permanence. Object permanence. In other words, even if their eyes are closed, the things that were there are still there. It's at this stage of life that they begin to learn that they begin to observe that. At this stage of life, they also realize that their actions can, cause things to happen in the world around them. If they push things, it can fall. If they throw things, it will go up. They begin to learn all of these things. They begin to learn that if they behave somehow, for example, it's at this stage that children learn that when sucking, if they bite, it pains. So they begin to see that their actions cause things to happen. And then it's at this stage of life that, they begin to recognize familiar faces, and they become anxious when they see strangers. From age 2 to 6 is the second stage that Piaget calls the pre-operational stage. The pre-operational stage. At this stage, they begin to learn how to use pictures and words to represent objects. In other words, they start thinking symbolically. Also, at this time, they are so consumed with their self view that it is difficult for them to see from other people's point of view. So you may find that a child between 2 and 6 will find it difficult to understand from other people's point of view. Psychologists calls this egocentrism. Egocentrism, rather. Call it egocentrism. Finally, at this stage, they get better with thinking, cognition, with language, expression, and all of that. The third stage is between the stage of 7 to 11, what Piaget calls a concrete operational stage. In this concrete operational stage, that is when logic develops. So the child becomes more logical. The child can now begin to relate, with other people's points of view better. It becomes more organized. The child becomes more organized in his or her thinking. He begins to understand the concept of conservation. Conservation. So, for example, you talk about this thing is full, this thing is about to finish, and all of that, and all of that. And then at this time, the child can begin to process the information they receive through reasoning, logical, inductive reasoning. They can process information and then come to conclusions that you didn't tell them. Before this stage of life, the conclusions that a child will reach are mostly the things you tell them. But at this stage of life, they can think for themselves, you know, and they can come to their own individual conclusions devoid of external input. And finally, is from 12 to adulthood. That is the stage that Piaget called formal operational stage. The child can now begin to do abstract thinking, things that they don't see physically. They can relate with such concepts. They can begin to interact with moral, ethical demands. They can understand political issues better. They can use deductive logic, reasoning from general principles to specific information. This is the stage where, you know, uh, children begin to relate with those things. It is from 12 to uh, 12 upward that a child can easily relate with adults at the adult level. And that's why they say once a child is 12, you need to start treating the child like a friend, no longer like a child. It helps a lot in their overall development. And then finally, I want us to consider the stages of emotional development. It may look like all of these is a lot of information, but just make notes, review them, go back to this video, listen over and over again. Before you know it, it will become working memory. It will become working memory. Now, there are four stages also of emotional development from birth to 1 year. That is the stage where a child begins to notice emotions. Usually, they say that children can generally relate with only three kinds of emotions. That is what they say: the emotions of happiness, emotions of anger, and emotions of unhappiness or sadness. So they say that a child can process only those three emotions. However, since children cannot talk, we really cannot tell if those are the only three emotions they feel. However, from the expressions of children, we can we can deduce, that that is what they have in their toolbox. So, for example, when a child is throwing tantrums, you know truly that it means, yeah, the child is angry. When a child is laughing, you know that the child is happy. And then when a child is crying, for instance, without tantrums, you know that there is something making the child unhappy or sad. Some people actually say that children cannot feel sadness. What they feel is fear. So when you see a child crying, the child is really not sad, the child is afraid. And in some ways I may defer to that a bit, because they say, for instance, if you pinch a child, they say the child is not crying because of pain. The child is crying because they are afraid. What is this? What may be causing pain? Well, children cannot talk, so we really cannot tell. But you see, between birth and 1 year old, the child will only reflect emotions that they see around them. They reflect emotions that they see around them. And that is why I tell people, uh, expressing anger before a child at this stage of life uh, may not be too healthy. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot get angry when a child is there, but how you express the anger matters a lot, because the child is receiving information, the child is absorbing information, they are learning, they are mastering. It is at this stage that some children develop the tendency to get angry very easily. And anger many times is a secondary emotion, not a primary emotion. I've taught people this over the years, and I've counseled people with this over the years, that anger is never a primary emotion, it is mostly a secondary emotion, in the sense that you, for instance, you are you have an outing with somebody, you are supposed to meet at 8, you got there by 8, the person wasn't there by 9, the person didn't show up by 10, you left there angrily, and you say, well, I was angry. Well, you were not angry, you were disappointed. You interpreted the disappointment as anger. And you see, we teach children this without knowing in the very early stages of life. A child does something and you snap at the child, you beat the child, knows this thing is wrong, but you you taught the child it was wrong by expressing anger. So the child is beginning to notice that if you want people to know that what they are doing is wrong, the way to let them know is to be angry. So at this stage, bottom line is children notice emotions. From 1 to 3, they begin to express those emotions. And that is when you begin to, try to let the child know what is the right way to express emotions and what is not too appropriate. That is when you tame tantrums. If you don't tame them, they can follow the child, through life. 3 to 5, the child begins to manage emotions, knows when to express their emotions, when not to express their emotions, what is the right setting, to say what is on their mind, what is not, the appropriate setting. And then from 5 and above, they begin to work on emotional stability, knowing how to judge their emotions. Okay, this is not just managing emotions now, but no, I should not feel this way. Okay, this is the right way to feel. So these are the 4 stages of emotional development. Now, limitations. This is very, very important, because you see, a Christian counselor must understand that all of the uh, efforts and influence of leading psychologists on the subject of human growth and development does not capture the spiritual nature of mankind. So there is a limit. While we understand and agree with the psychosocial stages of development, cognitive stages of development, emotional stage or stages of emotional development, we agree, we understand, but we know that there is a limit, because all of these explanations, they don't capture the spiritual nature of mankind. In fact, some psychologists will tell you that Christianity is just a coping mechanism. But no, Christianity is not just a coping mechanism. Christianity is the summary of what life is all about. It's the summary of what life is all about. So when you read Luke chapter 2, verse 40, Bible says the child, talking about Jesus, grew and became strong, and he was filled with wisdom, and the grace of the Lord was on him. The grace of the Lord was on him. So there was the place of spiritual, development. The grace of God was on him. So any form of talk or research or thinking on human development that does not capture the spiritual nature of mankind falls short of the ideal. And that is where we come in as Christian counselors. So say, yes, we understand the psychosocial nature of human development, we understand the cognitive nature, we understand the emotional nature, but we also understand the spiritual nature. So the extent of human development, how far reaching is this issue of human development? According to the Bible, human development does not start from birth, unlike what psychologists have proposed. Human development starts from God's mind. Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5. God said to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. So his development did not start from when he was born. His development started from the day God conceived him in his mind. From the day God began to consecrate and appoint him before he was even formed in the womb. So human development goes as far back as what was in the mind of God. And that is why we keep saying that the end point of our counseling as Christian counselors is for people to be free to step into their purpose, their God given purpose, to step into their true life's calling. Because human development does not start from birth, it starts from the mind of God. Again, David tells us that what we know today as embryological development is, in fact, a divine act of God. Embryologists will tell you how a child, develops blastula, morula, and then becomes a fetus and all of that. So there's the embryological development. But David said this is a divine act of God. Psalm 139, verse 13. He says, "You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." So it was God that literally, weaved you together in your mother's womb. The origin of man is not the day of his birth. The origin of man started from when God conceived him in his mind, and then the day God began to form that person in his mother's womb. So we must realize that God is at the center of human development. So the extent of development goes as far back as before man was even, conceived in the womb. Meanwhile, again, all of the psychologists and experts propose that human development ends with death. But no, the development of man continues even after death. Human beings continue to exist beyond the day they die, beyond their earthly bodies. Meanwhile, even after death, we retain full range of emotions and cognition. Full range of emotions and cognition. Read Jesus' parable about Lazarus and the rich man. Luke chapter 16 from verse 22 to 23. The poor man died, was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, full range of feelings and emotions, lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. The next verse was saying I was telling them to give him just a drop of water. So after death, listen, human beings will retain full range of emotions, full range of cognition. There is life after death. Human development continues beyond the day they die. So we must counsel people with eternity in view. We must counsel people with eternity in view. Our counseling must not just be about having an abundant life on earth, but also about having eternal life after death. We must let people understand that whatever you are facing on this earth is temporal. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 18, we do not fix our eyes on what we see, but on what is unseen, because what we see is temporary, but what we do not see is eternal. We must counsel with that worldview. We must counsel people with eternity in view. Matthew 16:22, the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will render to everyone according to his deeds. It doesn't matter what dysfunction happened in anybody's life at whatever stage of life. We understand and we must let people know that whatever decisions you take, you cannot blame it on a particular stage of life and find excuses for it. No, we must resolve it in such a way that you'll be able to stand before God, giving an account of how you handled the situation and receiving a commendation. And while we counsel people to see from that point of view, we must also operate from that point of view, knowing that whenever we counsel people, one day we are going to stand before God to give an account of the counsel that we gave them. Thank you very much for your attention. Tomorrow, we will continue with Module 4 of this training. Don't forget, subscribe to this channel, Spirit Brood channel, so that you can immediately get notifications of new modules as we upload them. And drop your comments also, your reviews of this lecture and the things that you learn, what stood out to you, what are you going to do with it, how is it going to be helpful in your practice as a Christian counselor. If you would also please let me know where you are listening to this lecture from. God bless you. See you again tomorrow.